This little bottle contains an absolute miracle. It'll help you start your day off feeling great and with a ton of energy, even if you've had a couple of drinks the night before. Zbiotics.com/reach. You'll get 15% off. And hello, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of Narrative Live. They're always special, but tonight is actually a very big special edition. It's 1 year since the three of us were gathered, almost a year, maybe a year and a day, since the three of us were gathered on this very screen to discuss what was then the beginning of this new war into Ukraine by the Russians. You know, the Russian tanks started rolling in on this night 1 year ago today. Now, a lot has changed in a year. And of course, Michael's going to remind us that it's not just been a year, it's been 9 years since the war against Ukraine started by the Russians. And in fact, that's true. But in 365 days, a lot has changed. One would say that it looks much better now for Ukraine than it did then. It looks much better for the West than it did then. However, there are looming clouds on the horizon, and we'll discuss tonight the breaking news about China and its intentions of sending arms, drones, and killer drones, and also weapons. And also parts for fighter jets to Russia to help them in the war in Ukraine. But all that is coming up. Let me first say good evening to Michael MacKay. It's been a while since we've had you on the air. How are you, Michael?
Hello.
And Eric Garland is back with us tonight. How are you, Eric?
Good evening.
So let's talk to Michael first about this year that we've been through, or 9 years we've been through. Tell us what your thoughts are on this auspicious night.
Yeah, it's a lot of anniversaries. The week started, and I was thinking back to 9 years ago, and it was the pinnacle of the events on Maidan, which we now call the Revolution of Dignity, and
Right.
the massacre there. And this looked like a very dark moment. This was the worst violence we had seen, the worst number of killings, and yet look at this turnaround. The Yanukovych fled Kyiv, and the revolution triumphed. But then, whoa, what's happening in Crimea here? So a matter of days later, and this goes on. And then, we go back to a year ago, and I'm thinking about, wow, this large offensive that has been expected for a long time. We've seen it preparing for close to a year and saying, hey, there's an offensive coming, and it comes. As and it looks very dark because there are large-scale advances in a very short period of time by the Russians invading from the north, from Belarus, from the east. But then, it's stopped. Not surprisingly to me and others, but certainly surprising a lot of people. And so it was also a time of surprises. So many people waking up and saying, wow, this is what's been going on all along, and this is the intent, this is the scale of it, and it could get a lot worse. And so it's a lot of people waking up. So it's a time of reflection, going back certainly to a year ago, but putting in that context of this escalating war in Europe that has led us to where we are today, to talk about the global aspects of the war, who is supporting Russia and what that means in a wider context.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is that is the night we're here to discuss, because that is the big topic that we're now discovering out of a German publication, Der Spiegel, publishing new details tonight about what they say are plans by the Chinese to provide killer drones to the Russians for use in Ukraine. It's quite a detailed article, and I want to go through it in detail. But before I do, I should remind everyone that we have someone else joining us a little later in the show. The executive director of Ukraine's StopFakes.org will be with us. And you'll find him incredibly knowledgeable about all things related to Ukraine's difficult time with disinformation, and he'll roll through some of the experiences that they've had in disinformation, and that's so important for us here in the United States and Canada as we focus on what is still a very viable and ongoing information war that seems to be happening here in our world against Russia and potentially China. Eric, your thoughts a year later?
Well, it's a very long 2-day war for Vladimir Putin. It has been an utter strategic catastrophe for the Russian Federation and its allies, which I would, include Bibi Netanyahu and/or Xi Jinping. This whole situation has turned out in the worst way possible. It has united NATO more than it has ever been united since the 1940s and 50s when it began. The image of Joe Biden in Kyiv a couple days ago, which was a surprise to us, right? And he took the train in. So, Russia's supposed to be, they refer to us as the main adversary, but they are not our peer. We could walk 1 year into their invasion. Our president can stroll in the center of Kyiv under a blue sky without worry that he's going to catch a nuke in the face, or this is a country that had been beset with Russian intelligence agents that had, if there's any country that Russia could influence in a number of malign ways, it would be Ukraine, a country that used to be part of the Soviet Union, where they share a lot, a different language, mind you, and different people, a very different character. But they had a lot, they had a lot of pull there and a lot of money there and a lot of their organized crime there. And 1 year into this, President Joe Biden can go and embrace and, literally hug and support a wartime president in that country that has struggled against Russia for its dignity, against the transnational organized crime organizations out there. And they have the full support of the United States. They have the full support of NATO. They have an increasing serious arsenal. And they will be the stabilizing regional power of Eastern Europe going forward. And that has been a huge year.
That was a moment, was it, Michael, to see Joe Biden and Zelensky walking through Kyiv. Tell me your thoughts at watching those videos and watching the images come through from Kyiv. What were you thinking?
A remarkable moment, a stunning move on the information warfare front against Russia that this happened, because that's incredibly important to them. I think even more significant. I mean, we talk about the failures of the Russian military and so on, but when you think about it, their information warfare has been top drawer. It's been amazingly effective, and we've seen its effectiveness amongst our own elites, for example. So, this is where they excel. And to see the United States pull off a master move like this is essential. And you know what I was thinking? I was seeing images like this, and I thought, the way Ukrainians think, what have we never seen? We've never seen a picture of Putin in Luhansk or Donetsk, ever. And these are cities that have been completely controlled by the Russian Federation for, let's say, 8 years. No doubt about it. So,
yeah, that was a
I'm
remarkable
saying,
point that
the
you're making
Russian
there.
dictator is afraid to go to a territory, which, by the way, he claims is a part of Russia, right? The United States has no claim on Ukraine, but Putin claims that those regions, Luhansk and Donetsk, are actually a part of Russia. But he can't even make good on his claim by showing up there, even for a little photo op. And that's what I thought of when I saw these pictures of walking around in the streets of downtown Kiev, which I know
Certainly
so well.
walking around
Michael,
outside as well. Just so
check out the
remarkable.
tie. Check out the tie on Joe here.
Yeah.
I
Good choice.
mean,
Well spotted. He's well put together. There's a good look that they put together. This is clearly not something done by accident. They thought about the very thing you're suggesting there, the information war and how important these images were going to be as they were transmitted into Russia and into Putin's brain. You know, this is the kind of stuff that would sit in his brain and occupy his mind for a long time. Because you point
And
out the information war is so important to them, and the information war against
exactly.
Ukraine is so
And
important.
the timing, of course, was timed with his visit to Warsaw and so on. But for Ukrainians, what really significant, this was the 20th of February. This was, or sorry, was it the 18th? But
Yes, I think.
anyway, it was the start of the Maidan massacre. And the two of them went to the
Oh,
memorial
yeah.
close to Maidan, where they have the photographs of the a little bit over 100 people who were killed in the space of a few days
I don't know if
around
these are
this
them,
time,
but this
9 years
is them,
ago. There
Adam
we
and
go.
Nora. Yeah.
That is the wall, the memorial wall. And so they took a moment to go there. This resonates so powerfully with the Ukrainian people.
Mm.
So, Russians see the American president there, that's significant. Americans see their president and saying, wow, this is positive action. And this moment here really resonates with Ukrainians. This is an ally.
Now the optics are pretty good there. Go ahead, Eric. Jump in.
no, I was just thinking, how much has changed, because who was guiding Yanukovych at the time of this massacre? Paul Manafort
Good point.
was, and so we had, we suffered under 4 years of the presidency that Paul Manafort foisted on the United States. And before that, he foisted mass murder on the people of Ukraine. And, a lot of us feared that we would not have a future, after Donald Trump, or not one we were going to be particularly happy about. But it's only been 2 years into the Biden presidency. And not only he's there, our president is there paying homage to the same people who made us suffer.
Yeah, I mean, there's
and
certainly
don't
a
forget that
continuity
Joe
there.
Biden had been there in the couple of months before then, because he was part of the various negotiations to try to say, "Hey, Yanukovych, back down here,"
Was
and so on.
was
So
that
he
was that
he
in
was on familiar
2014?
ground.
Was that 2014 when he did that?
Well, the Maidan Revolution started at the very end of November 2013, so it was like the December and then the January, February of 2014. Yeah, and he made a couple of visits as vice president.
Let's thread this needle a little bit more, because that attack on democracy that happened in Ukraine, that revolution, really set off what is now been 9 years of a war of democracy around the world. We're seeing the same war of democracy being fought in the United States on a daily basis, whether you care to admit it or not. It has certainly arrived in the United States, and certainly on an information basis, on a cyber basis. We've been fighting that war for a long time. It's not a military war, of course, but it does have all the hallmarks of what happened to Ukraine. We're seeing the same thing happen in the UK, where they had to experience Brexit. We've had the same thing happen in Brazil, in Israel tonight. There was even more demonstrations against their new government of Bibi Netanyahu again, which is sort of flouting democracy and introducing new dictatorial rule in Israel. So you've got, this is a global battle, as Joe Biden likes to remind us, between the forces of democracy and dictatorship. And it's a hugely symbolic thing that Joe Biden was able to be there on the streets of Kyiv with Zelensky. But the counter to that is now what we're expecting to see, which is Xi and Putin, two massive superpowers, in a meeting in the Kremlin in the next few days. Maybe it could take a little longer, but certainly in the Kremlin. And that follows a meeting between the head of the diplomatic services there in China and the leaders in the Kremlin just a couple of days ago. So what we're seeing is this counterpoint between, yes, you've got Zelensky and Biden on the one hand, for the forces of democracy, if you will, but on the other hand, you've got this alignment now of these forces of dictators, and these are the forces of Xi and Putin. We'll get into the arms that they plan to supply Putin in just a minute. But I'd love to get your thoughts, both of you, on what that means. We've sort of coming out of the I don't want to say the closet, it's not the right expression, but we're coming out. The forces are aligning themselves quite clearly in the world in what is turning out to be, a major world confrontation between these two ideologies. Eric or Michael, whichever.
Well, I mean, yeah, the masks are off right now, and with a lot of consequences. America has had a great number of strategic economic relationships with China. That's something we chose 30 plus years ago, to engage with them rather than compete with them. We thought we were engaging, and they never stopped their actual strategy. Masks off now. We understand that China is an adversary, if not an enemy. Russia, we learned to tolerate and deal with their oligarchs coming into town and buying houses in Florida and stuff like that. But now they're just the global villains that they've been for 100 years or so. Israel's story is a lot more difficult, but it's no less clear that Netanyahu and his supporters have picked a side here, and it is not that of the United States or Australia or the UK or democracy. They've turned in another direction, and this conflict in Ukraine, as it's gone on, has revealed all of that.
Michael?
Yeah, I look at this as, for the moment at least, we're at the signaling stage, and that's what this is. It's a visit and so on. And I'm looking at a precedent for this, which I don't think people have paid enough attention to, which is going to get to the weapons delivery. And that's what Iran has done. And that is that Russia ran out of they ran out of drones. So that's the immediate thing. They just fired off all their drones, and Ukraine started to get good at shooting them down. And they're getting up to, when it comes to drones, they're getting up to an 80-90% shoot down rate. When it gets to cruise missiles, they're at a 60-70%. So this is remarkable. So they went to Iran for drones, for these Shahed drones, and they got a few hundred of them, in addition to the ones that they had at the beginning. But that's it. They're gone now. And now there's negotiations. There's talk. Oh, maybe there'll be ballistic missiles, because Ukraine for the moment doesn't have the means to shoot down those. But it's still just talk. In the meantime, the Iranian regime is really coming down hard when Ukraine points out, like they'll show pictures. Here, it's a Shahed drone, and we're very interested in the Western components that we define. Oh, there's so much for sanctions. Look at that kind of thing. We find these components. But the Iranians are like, oh, how dare you? We're not supplying drones. And it's like, wait a minute, come on, why not admit it, kind of thing, and so on. So I think, to preempt what China is doing, we need to call out stuff like that more, and say that, and I think the United States is starting to do this as well, to show that sanctions can be extended to those that are going to break sanctions or work around them. Because,
Sure.
we can sanction entities and so on, but then you can just, put the company in the name of your wife and then keep on doing business, the way organized crime works, kind of thing. So it's no good if you can't extend them to, the way that people work around them. And and I think the United States is good at that. I don't think the EU is very good at it. They're playing catch up, but the United States is quite good at that. I think we do need to do that with regimes like Iran. We need to consider more that Belarus, although it's a very minor player, is it's on that side as well, and we can't ignore that as well. So
And
we should
China,
find.
I mean, at the end of the day, do you think that China's not going to be, China's going to become increasingly a target of the West? I mean, clearly at the Munich conference the other day, there was a lot of concern around China secretly or otherwise exporting weapons to Russia. And, I think most of the foreign secretaries and leaders who are present, warned China not to do this. And then now in the subsequent days that have followed, we're seeing these new revelations, probably from American intelligence, I would probably guess, revealing some of the potential moves that China's already undertaken. We'll go through those in a second. But, I chose to call this episode Allies of Darkness. Those are not my words, those are words of Joe Biden from his speech in Warsaw when he said, he said something to the effect of, let us be allies, let's not be allies of darkness, let us be allies of the light. And I think this is where he was suggesting, however likely he was doing it, that there is an alliance of people who are forming behind these dark motives, behind these dictatorship motives. And it's worth remembering that those were his words, and also how difficult that term is and how much it represents. Let's take a look at what this article in Der Spiegel says in great detail. So the cover, it says, and China reportedly negotiating with Russia to supply kamikaze drones. The US and Germany have warned China not to deliver weapons to Russia, according to information obtained by Der Spiegel. However, Beijing and Moscow are said to be negotiating the purchase of 100 strike drones, which could be delivered as soon as April. April, that's right around the corner. And according to this article, I'll just read a little bit further for you guys to get a little bit more detail in case you haven't seen it. One moment here. That's not the right one. This is the right one, I think. Yeah. So according to the information, the Russian military is engaged in negotiations with Chinese drone manufacturer Xianbingo Intelligent Aviation Technology over the mass production of kamikaze drones for Russia. The revelations create a new urgency in the debate over possible Chinese military support for Russia. So they reportedly agreed to manufacture 100 ZT-180 prototype drones before delivering them to Russian Defense Ministry by April 2023. Military experts believe the ZT-180 is capable of carrying a 35 to 50 kilogram warhead. Sources believe that the design of the unmanned aerial vehicle could be similar to that of Iran's Shahed-136 kamikaze drones. The Russian army has deployed hundreds of them in its attack on Ukraine, where they used the Iranian drones to target residential buildings, power plants, and district heating facilities, often resulting in civilian casualties. And they're also planning to deliver to Russia components and know-how, so Russia could build or produce around 100 drones a month on its own. That's kind of chilling stuff when you think about the amount of damage caused by those Iranian drones. I think that they will now have the supply of Russian drones there. Michael?
Well,
it's okay, Derek.
This is so important because China has moved from a somewhat covert economic war of buying up, farmland in all these different countries and sneaking in spyware and Huawei gear and rural telecom companies to they are now a military supplier that is executing kinetic military strikes on European soil. So the Belt and Road has become a frontal assault.
Well, through companies, through corporations, through shell companies. It's not going to be a direct line, but yeah, sure. This is potentially their weapons. It will be their weapons produced in China that will be striking European ground. There's no doubt about that. That if this goes through, that's what it's going to be. Very difficult for, I don't remember the last time in history we've had that happen. Guys?
I mean, they've been dumping enough fentanyl into the United States to kill, many, many states worth, if not all of us. So we were talking about the masks coming off here. Look, this has been going on for a while. And, now we're getting to things that, people recognize more as not broad spectrum warfare, but, things blowing up and, sharing military. You're military allies if you are with this sanctioned country. Like, you're not allowed to trade Russian sovereign debt. Most of these, most of their tech companies are sanctioned. You can't do business with their banks, or as Michael says, we'll extend that to you. That's exactly, why U.S. Treasury sanctions are successful, is like they're sanctioned. And if you work with them to help them get around it, you're sanctioned. Enjoy. That China has defied us with that. And, not just with some cash here, but with military equipment, lots of which is probably stolen from us. So these are rogue nations.
Yeah.
And I wonder about the decision that China is making, because as Eric just said, the mask is off and we're seeing them. But what are they doing? Well, first of all, they're choosing a side that is not going to win. And history respects winners. And however long it takes, we know that Russia will not succeed in the conquest of Ukraine. So they're backing the losing side, but they're also losing the side because what are these weapons going to be used for? To achieve Russian victory? Actually, the Russians don't even use that for that. They use these Shahed drones, and they're going to use these ones to attack civilian infrastructure, specifically the energy infrastructure. So this is civilian targets, and it's a war crime. So they're basically announcing that we're going to join the aggressor in committing war crimes at a time when we're at the point of the war we're saying Russia's going to lose this war. So, how is it in China's interest to do that? And the answer is it's not. So, they must be working with different assumptions about this. And I think they're wrong. This is just, of course,
Oh,
they're not, they don't care about Ukraine and they don't care about democracy and this kind of thing. But they're just making the wrong decision for their own power, for their own influence, and for you know they won't even to keep what they have, let alone get the other things that they
mm.
want to get. Making this fateful decision. Imagine another course of action where they said, "Yeah, we're going to be a leading nation, and we're going to join the unified sanctions and this kind of thing. And hey, we're an economic powerhouse, and we're going to be part of rebuilding Ukraine." I mean, in another universe, they could do that, couldn't they? And but they're
Oh,
not.
you ask a good
So
question. You ask a good question. Because if they are trying to do something much more significant than just win the war in Ukraine, are they, is this them opening up a front in this war against democracy, which hasn't got kinetic yet, but, has the potential
mhm.
to become kinetic and may
Yeah,
indeed
and
become
maybe
kinetic.
that's it.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, they cannot possibly side with a democracy, Ukraine, against an autocracy like them, Russia, and they got to make a choice, and they're making their choice.
Yeah. And that sets up potentially a global conflict, which no one really wants to think about. But, you have to sort of imagine that that's in the planning stages at the Pentagon and various other places. You can't not be planning for a global conflict based on these moves that we're now seeing.
Michael brings up a really great point, though, and you know, there are people who use the term crazy or madman when they're describing a rogue nation, and usually it's not correct. Like the Iranian regime is very brutal to its people, and it's very hostile to its neighbors. But they're a rational actor if you look at this in terms of like realism, realpolitik. North Korea has a cult like atmosphere that is brutal to its people and hostile to its neighbors, but it tends to keep it has certain limits to its behaviors. So people go, oh, they're nuts, they're madmen, and it's from a like geopolitical standpoint, it's not true. They're rational actors. What we're talking about here, and what Michael's opening up here is, I'm I'm very confronted by that question. Like, is this one of the first like really like irrational geopolitical moves that we've seen of a country of this size? Because yeah, what I mean, Russia's been militarily destroyed, humiliated. What they're borrowing from Iran that has been sanctioned for 30, 40 years. This was a power that 50 years ago we were afraid was gonna take over Europe if we weren't there, right? And now they can't even tugboat the Admiral Kuznetsov, their sole remaining aircraft carrier. They can't even drag it around a harbor with a tugboat. It will fall over and go straight to the bottom. That's how bad their stuff is right now.
But
They're not
you
going to
make a
win,
good
but China sided with them.
Yeah, but you make a very good point about rational actors and so on. And that's when we look at it from our point of view. For example, you mentioned a geopolitical point of view. So, for example, from a geopolitical point of view, it makes no sense for Russia to have invaded Ukraine and then to launch the large invasion. And so it just makes no sense at all. And then you can say, oh, well, then militarily, they're doing crazy things. Like, why use your military to attack civilians when you're not attacking the Ukrainian army that's right in front of you on the front line, right? You could be bombing their defenses and so on, but oh no, you're sending it to some city and you're hitting a hospital or an apartment building. What are you doing, kind of thing? And you said, you're right, it doesn't make any sense. strategically, militarily, geopolitically. But then you say, wait a minute, there's the issue of the genocide. There's the issue of this hatred of the Ukrainian people and the need to destroy them as a distinct people. And then, and this is what Ukrainians have been saying all along. See, this is just a genocide that has been, surging and falling back and surging back for a very long time. And it's reasserting us now. And when we say, oh, we've outgrown that and so on, the answer is no, we haven't. In that part of the world with those people, it haven't outgrown it at all. So the madness is in doing this crazy thing that make no sense, but they fit the ideology. To me, it's no different than you would say, why in the world did Hitler invade the Soviet Union? What a stupid move in every way, you know? But it makes sense if you realize he thought that Slavs were subhuman and that it was his destiny to, achieve Lebensraum in the East, kind of thing. And you say, yeah, that wasn't going to happen, and that's crazy. And it doesn't matter. It made sense in that context. So if you read Putin's manifesto, his Mein Kampf, on the historical unity of the Ukrainian and Russian and Ukrainian people, it makes sense. It's saying, well, if they're not a people, then Ukrainians who think they're a nation, they're actually just insane Russians. So let's go make them think otherwise or kill them if they won't. It's that kind of Russia, and that's not the language of geopolitics, is it? But it's the language of this war.
Or you could argue this is a war against the United States, that China is trying to, subvert the number one superpower and become the number one superpower. And it's doing so by providing these proxy wars on various fronts, whether it's Ukraine and potentially Taiwan. It's weakening the United States economically through various measures, and not to mention the presidency of Donald Trump, COVID, you name it, a whole bunch of other things that you could pile on to the plate there. And you could say this is a long-term strategy to weaken the United States, that for them, keeping the United States engaged in a war in Europe and maybe in Asia is ideal because it leaves the American home front exposed, or more exposed. And then it allows for, continued economic expansion by the Chinese into other parts of the world, whether it's Latin America or elsewhere. In the interim, sort of buying influence in Africa, in Latin America, as I mentioned, in other parts of the world. So America becomes increasingly weakened by all of this activity. And over time, the end result, the end goal is not about Ukraine at all. The end goal is about weakening or destroying America, but certainly seeing China emerge as the number one power in the world.
I think the ideological.
To that extent, they're aligning with the Russian special operations, which have been to pour gasoline on the flames. There's this, conspiratorial atmosphere in the United States. Let's pour gasoline on that. And MAGA and you mentioned and other things, or Brexit. That there's always been that movement in Britain. But hey, let's throw gasoline on that. Let's do some illegal financing of vote leave and things like that, and just kind of goose it. So Russia doesn't start these things. They all have a native basis, which is really important to note. They're not so clever and genius that they can just cause a revolution or something, but they certainly can pull on certain strings and exacerbate certain trends. They could make people who are nobodies, like Donald Trump, look like they're somebody. Easily, they can just say, hey, let's just generate buzz, and suddenly, what? People are taking this seriously. In fact, they're just doing an echo chamber of their own propaganda, but the effect is to make it look otherwise than it was. And anyway, China is aligning with that sensibility. So maybe they're just tapping into what the Russians have always been good at, which is special operations and information warfare.
Yeah, you haven't seen a Chinese involvement in a war in a long time, but it doesn't mean they're not capable. Eric?
No, I was just thinking the taking this from an ideological point of view that can be irrational, but it has logic, but some of that logic is suicidal. Hitler got involved with the Wehrmacht to the point where he said, you may never retreat. Now there's tactical reasons. If you find yourself on the other side of a river with infantry and you got water to your back, you need to get back over that river, because if you get pinned down when someone's coming at you, you're going to get massacred. And Hitler would not allow that. Now, that made sense to him personally, but is terrible for his commanders. So when you get that kind of cult of personality and that kind of ideology takes the place of strategic thought, you can get some pretty weird looking stuff, like trying to invade Russia in winter, which never works out, right? Historically, but people have done it a couple times.
To give an
The
example of Eric, that's exactly what Putin ordered the Russians to do at Liman. You remember that was like half a year ago. Yeah. Don't
Mhm.
give up an inch of ground, and they actually sent some better quality troops there, and it was idiotic. It was a forward position, and it actually wasn't strategically important, right? They should have just withdrawn, 20 kilometers back, and it would have been done much better. And so it's exactly that same thing. It made no sense militarily, but it fit the ideology. We're Russians. We're
Mm.
greater than Ukrainians. How could we possibly give up ground once
Mm,
we've taken it?
And the optics at the end of the day, if you're looking at China joining Russia's very losing effort currently in Ukraine, are not good for China. So, as you point out, even if their goal is to destroy America, if this little portion of their plan isn't going to work out at all, why do it? And that's hard to make sense of. I want to just point to another piece of this article by Der Spiegel, which says this is other information that Der Spiegel got. The companies under the control of China's People's Liberation Army had planned to deliver replacement parts for Russia's Su-27 fighter jets and other models. Der Spiegel has learned in its reporting that plans had apparently already been made to falsify shipping documents to make the parts for military aircraft appear to be replacement parts for civilian aviation. Now, that to me is again another sort of disturbing development to see them engage on that front. And by the way, you'll appreciate this, Eric, that the shipments I think were coming through the UAE, or at least some of these shipments that have been illegally pushed through to Russia have been coming through the UAE. But we are talking about a pretty significant thing here. That these planes, many of which have been shot down, but many, I guess, they still have a few left. But the fact that China will be secretly providing, or is planning to secretly provide parts so these planes can fly over and shoot civilians, it again suggests to me that that conversation about fighter jets is going to be reopened pretty quickly when you're seeing that China is now helping China do this and potentially kill civilians from the air, as we've seen before in Ukraine. This is a serious development, isn't it, Michael?
Um, yes, it is. And I think, of course, we should be sending fighter jets to Ukraine. We should be sending them right now. But there's a sense in which I'm also a little bit reassured by this. So, for example, what we're not seeing. So, China's talking about sending spare parts, but they're not talking about sending, for example, fighter jets. Um, Russia has lost a lot of aircraft, over 200 since the war began, and they're not able to replace them. There's no, eh, Russia hasn't manufactured a modern fighter in years, and they're certainly not doing it now. So if we talk
they're
about spare parts, then
expensive.
it's expensive, it's time consuming, and it needs some key technology which is no longer available to the Russians. So they're not making new aircraft. So what they're doing is they're making the aircraft that have not been shot down yet and are still airworthy, capable of flying again. And of course, spare parts helps with that. And then the other point is about the drones. What was that announcement about? The early batch of 100 drones. That sounds frightening, but given the high shoot down rate that Ukrainians have, which let's say is about 80%. That's actually a modest estimate. There have been some nights when they've shot down 100% of the drones sent. That means that you have to send it in a swarm. So those 100 drones, you would have to send all of them in one night, or maybe over 2 nights, and that's it. You're all gone. And maybe a dozen of them got through to their target and hit something, not accurately, but they hit something. It's actually not that significant. I mean, Ukraine has endured these kinds of attacks in greater numbers. And I read an announcement just a couple days ago. It was someone from Kyiv, and they said, "Hey, for the first time, there were no power cuts, and the power company didn't announce that there were going to be any."
Hmm.
And this was like, "Hey, I can't remember the last time there wasn't a power cut
Yeah.
in Kyiv," and that means that Ukrainians, with a lot of Western help, have rebuilt the infrastructure. They got the substations up and running and so on. It's still fragile and so on. And there's a lot of people without power, and that means without heat. So it's still a crisis, but it's better than the night of the attacks kind of thing. So I look at the scale of what China is doing, and I'm saying that's still about signaling at this point. If it was serious, it would be thousands of drones. It would be actual fighter aircraft. Then that would be substantial.
Well, and to be
So
clear, they've made no announcements about this. This is all leaks provided to Der Spiegel. This
leaks,
is not them
exactly. And of
saying,
course, they're perfectly free to back away from it. Maybe
yeah,
it's a trial balloon. They start to see the reaction. Oh, you're going to get, you know, if your technology ends up in this stuff, that means your firms are going to get sanctioned. That could hit home
yeah, and
if we make
absolutely
that
this.
message clear.
And that's what tonight's show is about. And I think that's what the real intention of these leaks is to create enough awareness in the public and in diplomatic circles to pressure China to realize that this is not a winning proposition for them. Eric, I know you want to jump in, so go ahead, and then I'm going to just finish up off this article because there's a couple of other good details to throw in here. But go ahead.
I was just thinking, if China is, if Xi Jinping is going down this road for ideological reasons because he just resonates more, he cannot support a free democracy. He doesn't want to be part of the rebuilding of a democratic, member of NATO, and so he's just going to help his Russian allies continue their genocidal intentions towards the Ukrainian people. I have a message for Wall Street. Stop laundering China's money. Stop putting more over there. That's over. Those days are gone, guys.
Yeah, I mean, we might be nearing those stages where we are going to have sanctions against China that are that extreme. Let me just finish off this article so you guys get a full sense of what was reported here. In January, Dutch public broadcaster NOS reported that Dutch microchips had been delivered to the Russian defense industry via Chinese companies. According to the report, an analysis by the Ukrainian forces of seized Russian offensive weapons like rockets, helicopters, and drones, or their remains, showed that microchips from the Netherlands had apparently been installed in 10 of the 27 Russian weapons inspected. And then for months, reports have been circulating among security officials in a handful of countries that Chinese companies have been providing satellite images of combat zones in Ukraine to the Russian side. In response, the US government recently placed the Chinese satellite company Changsha Tianyi Space Science and Technology Institute, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, on its sanctions list. Washington claims the company's images have been obtained by the Wagner Group, the Russian private mercenary unit notorious for its brutality to enable combat operations in Ukraine. And the rest of this article is really about how there is, pressure mounting in diplomatic circles on China to stop doing all this stuff, which of course they deny they're doing all along. Of course, they'll deny it. They are not in a position yet to announce it. But you're right. This could be very much a trial balloon, very much a test of the waters to see how far the world will be able to, countenance a potential China support of Russia. But it seems to me that this is going to be very unpopular. I mean, there's no ways, especially at the year anniversary of this war, that the thinking individual world is going to be supportive of this particular initiative by China. It just seems like a losing proposition, as you point out, Michael and Eric. Either of you want to jump in there before we move on to the next segment? If you want to just wrap up your thoughts about this particular Chinese offensive or potential offensive in joining the war in Ukraine on Russia's side.
I'll just jump in here with a little prediction. I'm going to predict that China will back off of anything substantial in the same way that Iran backed off about ballistic missiles when enough light was shone on what they've been doing with the Shahed drones. So that's going to be my prediction about this. A bit of shuffling around and then just quietly ignoring this.
Yeah, I think you might be right. I mean, I think that's a real possibility. And certainly America's very influential and has ways of, encouraging countries to do things that they want. Eric?
Guys, I think we should schedule February 23rd, 2024. It's going to be a presidential election year here in the United States, and I'll bet that the world looks pretty different.
In what way? I'm going to call you on that. What do you think it's going to look like in a year from now?
I think there'll be more bright, sunny days in Kyiv.
Yeah, hopefully so. Hopefully so. On the other side of this break, I'm going to say goodnight to you guys now because I know you've got other things to do and I don't want to have to keep you here for this whole segment. On the other side of this break, however, you may want to listen in because we'll be talking to the executive director of StopFake.org, the Ukrainian organization that looks at all the disinformation efforts of the Russians and helps dispel them or dispute them or disprove them. His name is Ruslan Denchenko, and he'll be joining us right after this break, which I know, Eric, is your favorite topic of all, which is our sponsor, the hangover cure, guys. But but in the meantime, Michael MacKay, thanks for being here tonight. I really appreciate your time. We'll have you back soon. I'm sure this story is not going away. And Eric Garland, thank you for being here tonight. You guys can be followed at your various Twitter accounts. Michael's huge now. You've got like a quarter of a million, or I don't know. How many people do you have following you right now?
Yeah, it's getting up there. Almost 250,000. Yeah.
Congratulations on that. And tell everyone what that account is.
It's at MHMCK.
At MHMCK. And Eric Garland is at Eric Garland. Plus, you can catch his Game Theory Today on YouTube and other places. Eric, anything you want to promote about what's coming up on your show? Anything like that?
Nope.
All right. Thank you both for being here tonight. It's been a really interesting show. And up next, we'll tell you all about StopFake.org and the disinformation efforts of the Russians. We'll be right back. Hey everybody, it's Zev from Narrative. This is the most romantic week of the year. And you know what that means? Dinners, dates, drinks, and more. And sometimes those celebrations can leave you feeling a little worse for wear the next morning, if you know what I mean. Well, I have discovered an absolutely brilliant solution for that. It's called Z-Biotics. It's a pre-alcohol probiotic, and it's a miracle formula that allows you to have a few drinks at night without getting those awful post-drinking blues the next day. No need to worry about safety. It's all natural and FDA compliant. You can get Z-Biotics for 15% off your first order with my code REACH, R-E-A-C-H. I recommend getting the 6-pack. That's what I got, and it's a great deal, and you'll have a couple of extra to share with your friends. Click the link in the description box or scan the QR code on the screen right now and use code REACH, R-E-A-C-H, at checkout. Go to zbiotics.com/reach and get 15% off, plus 100% money-back guarantee if you're not satisfied. Make this date night one even Cupid would be proud of. Get some Z-Biotics today so you can still feel the love tomorrow. I like that. Someone tell that guy it's not Valentine's Day anymore. It's a great product, though, and we really appreciate your support of our sponsors. You know, we can't make these shows without the support of our sponsors and also our patrons. And you can join our patrons at patreon.com/narrative. Now, let's turn to Ruslan, who's sorry, I forgot about I had a little confusion here. Ruslan Denchenko, who is the executive director of StopFake.org. It's an organization in which whose members we've interviewed before. They do incredible work at stopping disinformation in Ukraine by going after it as soon as it pops up. As soon as a narrative that's fake pops up, they go after it, dispel it, and help everyone know what's true and what's not true. And actually, have had a great impact on global events because of that, because they've been able to dispel some of these disinformation efforts by Russia. They've been able to actually, stop potential terror attacks or other attacks from happening against Ukraine. So on the 1-year anniversary, it was great to be able to talk to Ruslan about his own feelings about a year later, a year into this major offensive, but also to listen to him talk about the major achievements of StopFake.org and what we in the United States and in Canada can learn from these incredibly smart people who've been able to tackle disinformation in the way they have. Here's my interview with Ruslan Denchenko.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let me get your initial thoughts as you are now 1 year into an increased conflict with Russia. Of course, the war has been going on for 9 years, but you're now 1 year into this larger conflict. How are things in Kyiv? How is life in Kyiv? And what are your thoughts about this sort of protracted war that keeps going on?
Almost every day we have alerts and we go to bomb shelters, and my son who is in school, every time this alert, they hear this sound, the children, they go to bomb shelters. And we had very difficult times without electricity. At least for 10 days, we didn't have disconnection of electricity at our home.
It is encouraging to hear that schooling is continuing, even though your child has to endure all these sirens and these alerts.
This is one of the things I hate Russia because of my children and other children. They have to experience all these alerts, They have to experience sound of Russian missiles, and this is terrible. Unfortunately, we have to experience it, and we still don't know for how long it will continue.
Yeah, it robs them of their innocence and their childhood, really. And it's interesting you say you hate Russia. Did you hate Russia before?
No, we understood that this is probably not the friendliest country in the world. Of course, we remember what happened with Georgia. Of course, we remember what happened with Moldova and many other Russian neighbors. But truthfully, we have never expected anything like that. That we didn't expect the full-scale invasion, the war, and these terrible things that Russian soldiers and Russian military do in Ukraine.
It's forever redefined the relationships that Ukrainians have with Russians and Russia. And yet, the leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin, seems determined to continue his war. There are reports today about Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, potentially agreeing to send weapons to arm the Russian forces. How is that news landing in Ukraine? Are people concerned about the potential increase in Chinese support to the Russians?
Of course, know that Russia expecting some shortage in equipment. We know they lost a lot of tanks and other machinery in Ukraine. And of course, we don't know any country, Iran or China, help them to restore their activities, to help them to bomb Ukrainian cities. It will be terrible. And we expect peaceful initiatives from China. We expect they pressure Putin to stop this aggression, to stop this war. We don't expect them or anybody else to supply them with the military equipment they need.
Yeah, it would be a travesty and a real disaster for the world and the region if China suddenly decided to enter this war with weapons to Russia, especially when Russia doesn't even seem to be capable of fighting, regardless of the weapons it has. This would just be an extension of the horrors we've already seen on the battlefield. There's 145,000 deaths. What a waste of human life. What a waste of just human resources for a country to be sending 145,000 people to their death. And yet somehow Vladimir Putin justifies continuing to do this. You must have known people who have been to the front. You must have known people who've also killed some of these Russians. Are you feeling like there's a trauma that's setting in amongst Ukrainians?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of our friends, they left the country. They take their children to abroad or to other safest, more safe places. Our family, my family members, they lived in occupation in Sumy region. It's very close to the border with Russia. Fortunately, these places liberated right now. And of course, there are a lot of my friends with weapons who drafted to the army. And by the way, two members of our Stop Fake team, they're in the army right now. Everyone in Ukraine feels this war like it's personal. It's not that it's far away somewhere.
Yeah, and it does seem like it's getting bloodier and bloodier. Certainly the offensive seems to be, from the Russians, seems to be stepping up in recent days. These are ordinary people going up to the fronts in most cases. They're not trained soldiers. They're people, as you point out, from your Stop Fake team. They're ordinary people you'd see doing normal jobs in civilian society. And they're being forced to face all these incredible challenges. Is there a hopeful side for you about how things are going? Is there a hope about the future of Ukraine once this war is all over?
We are researchers and we monitor Russian media and we monitor also Belarusian media. So unfortunately, we don't see any signs that Russia is going to finish this war. But the good sign that, well, just monitoring Belarusian media, we don't see signs that Belarus is going to join Putin's efforts and going to send its troops to Ukraine. And let me remind you that we are a fact-checking project and we're just monitoring Russian media. You can sometimes predict the future, but so far we don't see any good signs that Putin is going to finish this war.
Let's talk a little bit about your work at stopfake.org. It's a terrific organization that spends a lot of time with Russian disinformation. And we in the United States have been going through very similar kind of disinformation offensive over the last few years. Now, it does all seem very much connected to the initial invasion in Ukraine 9 years ago. It's certainly when the could pinpoint the start of this war on democracy that has extended now across the world and has landed in the United States as a real divider of the people by polarizing people. especially using more traditional mainstream news like Fox News and those kinds of organizations. What have you discovered in Ukraine? Was there such an offensive to try and polarize the country before the invasion began?
You're absolutely right. Almost 9 years ago, the group of professors and alumni of the School of Journalism, they gathered together and decided to create this fact-checking project. And we started to monitor Russian media and fact-check information that Russian media produced about Ukraine. And what we learned for these 9 years, as I said, sometimes you can predict the future just watching Russian television. And it was a funny story that the very first article I wrote for the website, it was about Ukrainian refugees in Russia. It was March of 2014, excuse me, and there were no refugees. There were no events in the Donbass and Crimea. So when I checked this information, I called to Russian Federal Migration Service, and they told me that they don't have refugees from Ukraine. But what the lady told me that they have received an order from Moscow to prepare places for refugees. And it was strange that there are no refugees, but you do something to prepare for refugees. And several weeks later, I understood when events in Donbass started, refugees appeared. But the Russian media, they already prepared their society for refugees, and their migration services, they were prepared. So they staged everything. They planned everything beforehand. And the same happened with this full-scale invasion. We have noticed the change in Russian media rhetoric exactly 1 year before this full-scale invasion. The whole year we observed and monitored Russian media. And let me tell you that 3 months before this invasion, we had a conclusion that Russia will do it. Russia will invade. So I think this is one of the outcomes of the work of our team, that again, you can have useful information about plans of Putin, about plans of Kremlin.
It's remarkable how much you can glean from the disinformation, how much valuable information is in there, and how important it is to actually fight disinformation as you guys do on a very quick, immediate basis, to disarm whatever is coming in as quickly as you can so it doesn't spread. And I want to take a look at some of those examples that you shared with me. The first example relates to the initial reason that Vladimir Putin and Russia thought it was appropriate to attack the Donbass, and that was that they felt that 14,000 people had been killed in a genocide by Ukrainians, meaning 14,000 ethnic Russian speakers. Tell us a little bit about how you found out that wasn't, in fact, true, and how you were able to disarm some of Vladimir Putin's rhetoric.
Yeah, absolutely. Russian officials and Mr. Putin, he uses this information about 14,000 casualties of this war as a pretext for this full-scale invasion. He said that it was Ukrainian genocide against Russian-speaking population in Donbass. But numbers say the different story. Putin's statement is manipulation. 14,000 casualties. It's casualties for 8 years of this conflict in Donbass. And almost all of them are not civilians. They are military personnel from both sides.
From
And
both sides. Oh, that's interesting.
both sides, yes. And for 2 recent years before this invasion, the number of casualties, they were single digit numbers, 5 and 6. So this conflict after signing this Minsk agreement calmed down, and there were no reason at all to start this full scale operation, because hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. And by the way, this 5 and 6 casualties, people lost their lives because of mines and other explosives, not because of shelling of Ukrainian army. So it was absolute manipulation, and we proved it with numbers from official sources, and they are confirmed by even from Donetsk and Luhansk. So it's not that Ukrainian side created this number. So these are numbers from the opposites.
So the pretext for war that Vladimir Putin had, this idea that there was some sort of genocide in the Donbass, not true at all. That in fact, what he was using as a number there, this
it was
14,000.
absolutely manipulation, and it was a false pretext, artificial pretext.
I guess the other pretext that the Russians had in the initial stage of this full-scale invasion was that they were trying to denazify Ukraine. They said here in this one particular article that they were able to detain Ukrainian Nazis. Now, you found out that these guys were not, in fact, Ukrainian Nazis.
Yeah, absolutely. And it happened exactly 1 year before the full-scale invasion. They detained a lot of young men in different Russian cities. And when we checked this information, we discovered that all of them, they had no connections with Ukraine, and they were not terrorists. And by the way, they were released from prison just a few days after this information was disseminated by Russian media. Hundreds of Russian media outlets, they disseminated this information. And we talked with these guys, we talked with the investigatives. So they told us that they have no connection with Ukraine. They were just regular local people, local Russian citizens, and they had nothing to do with Ukrainian Nazis. And we think that after the reaction from Russian government officials to this story, we have an impression that FSB created this story as a potential artificial pretext for full-scale invasion. So I think this story is very important, and we think that we prevented some real terrorist acts in Russia.
Here's an interesting one that many people still today quote about these biolabs, these weapons labs in Ukraine that Russia and Vladimir Putin, even in his speech the other day, he commented on about the biolabs.
The truth is very simple. There are no biolabs in Ukraine created to develop biological weapons. It's absolute nonsense. And Russian media and Russian government officials use these stories, use these fakes to explain why Russia invaded in Ukraine. No, there is no single piece of evidence to prove that any kind of laboratories where Ukrainians with American help created biological weapons like mosquitoes who bite only Russian speaking population, or birds who disseminate some kind of viruses that can affect only Russians. So there were some very stupid fakes.
It's always surprised me that a country that's led by a Jewish leader is being accused of being run by Nazis when, in fact, he's Jewish. But it's more intricate than that, right? What do they mean by these in this context of Ukraine?
They're trying to persuade their own population. And of course, they're trying to persuade foreign countries' leaders and citizens that Nazis are not just popular in Ukraine, but the Ukrainian government tribes Nazi views and Nazi ideology. But again, for anybody who lives in Ukraine, it's absolute nonsense. And there are different research that shows that Ukrainians are more tolerant to other nations than their neighbors. And of course, the level of anti-Semitism in Russia is much higher than in Ukraine. And what they do in Russian propaganda, they take the individual case, for example, somebody with the Nazi tattoo or somebody with the Nazi flag. They try to say that these individual cases are general picture. There are Nazism everywhere. There are people who subscribe to this ideology in the United States, in Russia, of course, and everywhere. But in Ukraine, of course, even if representatives of alt-right parties took part in elections, they have never won any elections or took any significant number of places in the Ukrainian parliament. Again, why the Russian propaganda try to use these stories? They try to persuade our partners in the European Union or in the United States, do not help Ukraine, do not supply weapons to Ukraine, because your weapons can get to Ukrainian Nazi. And of course, there are a lot of stories that the weapons that our partners supply to Ukraine goes to other countries, to the European Union, and the terrorists in these countries can get the Western precise weapons. So the only one task of Russian propaganda to ruin our relations with our partners.
President Biden has been exemplary, in my opinion, in terms of his leadership on this issue, in terms of uniting NATO, in terms of uniting the allies and creating this environment where there's been both sanctions and there's been a supply of weapons to the Ukrainians. And it was really heartwarming to see him the other day with President Vladimir Zelensky in Kyiv in what was really a very touching moment. They do seem very close, and they do seem like they genuinely like and respect each other and are in this together. Is that the sense you got out of watching those images? And how did you feel seeing the President of the United States with Zelensky in Kyiv?
I didn't believe that Biden came to Kyiv until I saw the real video of him walking on streets of our capital. Truthfully, I didn't expect, and I think it was a very powerful step. And I think in Ukraine appreciate this gesture, and we consider this as a very, very strong sign of support. So I think it was very risky, and I think not just me, but a lot of people in Ukraine, and not just in Ukraine, did not expect this step from American president. But again, we appreciate it so much.
Certainly seeing the two of them strolling around in the street outside was quite stunning, with the air raid sirens going off in the background. And that is a sight you don't expect to see by the person in the world that is probably the most secure and guarded. And yet it must have really impacted the Kremlin, as I'm sure that they would have imagined that they would have had Vladimir Putin walking through the streets of Kyiv at this time. When they began this war, that is not, in fact, what happened. And it's an indicator of just how desperate they are right now in terms of this war situation. And looking at the front lines today, I was really struck by how few of their very many offensives that are trying to break through the Ukraine front line there are just being repelled again and again. There just seems to be no opportunity for the Russians to really penetrate that front line. Is that the sense you're getting, that even this supposed new offensive is turning out to be rebuffed by the Ukrainians?
We think that our army becomes stronger. And again, we appreciate the help from Western countries. And I must say that the feeling I had the first weeks or first month of this invasion and the feelings I have right now, they are absolutely different, because Russian troops were just 10 kilometers from my own home. And I heard the explosions, and basically I heard the Russian tanks coming around. It was very dangerous. And after the victories, after our army liberated Kyiv, and many other places, I think that Ukrainians have no doubt that sooner or later, Ukraine, the whole country, will be liberated, and there is no other choice that Ukraine will win.
That's a great place to leave it. Ruslan Denchenko of stopfake.org, the co-founder and executive of the organization. Thank you very much for spending some time with us tonight on Narrative. Hopefully we'll talk again, and hopefully this war will end soon, and hopefully you'll be able to return to a completely normal life before you know it.
Thank you so much.
Have a great night.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let me get your initial thoughts.
So that's pretty great to have,
Ruslan Denchenko from stopfake.org joining us tonight. Check out their website, stopfake.org. A little hint for you: if it's in Ukrainian, you can always translate it using Google Translate, or if you're on the Chrome browser, just hit that translate button and you'll find all that information you need to know. It's a great service, and one we should be emulating in North America. That's our show for tonight. My thanks to Michael MacKay and Eric Garland as well for being here tonight. A big show discussing the really difficult geopolitical challenges ahead as we see China tiptoeing towards a bit of an alliance with Russia on Ukraine. As always, you're welcome to join our incredible patrons who help us make this content every week. You can go to patreon.com/narrative. It's patreon.com/narrative and sign up today. Starting next week, we'll be doing our Spy Murdoch series, which will ultimately be a members-only series. So next week is free, so everyone can check out what we've got in store. But from next week, from the week after that, the content will be exclusive to our members. It's a great series all about Rupert Murdoch and his espionage activities for many, many decades. And we'll explain to you how that impacts the Fox News that we have today. So that starts next Wednesday. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe. If you're watching on Twitter, don't forget to follow my Twitter account and also set up notifications for live feeds or live video when we do them, and you won't miss a future narrative ever again. That's our show for tonight. Thanks again to all our guests. We shall see you next week on Wednesday for the premiere of Spy Murdoch. Have a good night, everybody. Every minute of Narratives reporting, every story that we break is made possible by our patrons. You too can become a patron by joining at patreon.com/narrative.
Narrative, where truth lives. One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narrative, where truth lives.